why are kids allowed to look at porn? I know that obviously kids are technically not allowed to look at porn, but basically they are. Kids aren't allowed to drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes, and by and large they don't. It doesn't happen, really. It's quite easy to prevent them from doing so. Of course, 16, 17-year-olds who know 18-year-olds, they can get cigarettes and alcohol. Sometimes they can steal it from their parents. It's not such a big deal, but they're certainly not routinely allowed, like, kind of just consistent access to it. And if they were allowed consistent access to alcohol and cigarettes, it'd be pretty bad, and I think in many ways porn is even worse. And it seems like one of the biggest ills of our time. Like, my entire generation has grown up sexually fucked up and addicted to porn, and I would say having a lot of relationship problems, not all of which can be blamed on porn, but I don't really know any men my age who haven't had some kind of problem with porn over the years, who haven't had some kind of addiction or just looked at it more than they wanted to, or had some kind of sexual dysfunction brought about as a result of it. And I didn't have access to porn until I was, I guess, like 14. People started having like crappy videos that they would Bluetooth each other on their phones. Like on our phones, they were like bad quality, and like they weren't really to my tastes. It was just whatever was there, and even that was crazy. That was like overwhelming to see that. But it wasn't, I guess, until a year or two after that it was sort of like, oh yeah, you can just literally go online and see anything, anytime, and it's completely free, and there's really nothing stopping you. And I think about people who are growing up now where they're not having to wait for the technology to get better or for it to become more available. It's just already like that. Like Pornhub and all that stuff is just already there and in full force, and like it's broader now than ever. It's crazy. I mean, the amount of it is overwhelming. Like, even as an adult who, like, now I would say I'm like relatively in control of it, kind of, but not really. I mean, I'd say I still kind of have a problem with it, I guess, at times, like at times I don't at all, but sometimes I do. And to me, even, it's overwhelming. It's like, wow, like, because you're watching something and you're like, oh, there could be something even better. And then you have like 15 tabs open and you're like, oh man, like, I want to watch a bit of this, and then I'm going to, and it's just, it becomes like, it's beyond unnatural. It's not just unnatural in the sense that you're watching other people have sex, and that usually the sex is quite weird and performative in nature, or maybe even worse, it's like really sort of weird and disgusting. But also the level of access and how quickly you can switch between, we're messing with our internal hardwiring. I think that's obvious to anyone. You don't need science to back that up. It's just a sort of an objective, observable fact that, we're designed to be like, to get horny for certain things and at a certain pace, and it's just not natural, and real life can't keep up with that. And the accounts of people becoming damaged by that are just endless, basically. So I can't even begin to imagine having had access to that since I was like really young. And the thing is, my parents are pretty old. Like, I don't think they would have known. I don't think if I was a kid now, like, I don't think they would have known really that is a serious danger that they should look out for. There's a huge generational gap, and there may not be going forwards. I'm sure this will change eventually. I know it will change eventually. It's one of those things that it has to change because it's just wrong the way things are now. But it's not something we should wait patiently for. It's like it's beyond. It's not like, oh, weed should be legal and it probably will in the future. This is something that's like seriously sick and wrong, and harmful to children, and it's just kind of allowed to go on, and nobody cares really. And there's a lot of discussion about socio-political issues and things blown way out of proportion, and a lot of bullshit basically in the media. People talking about a lot of bullshit and focusing on things that affect really small numbers of the population, or things that just basically affect adults who can kind of shut up and just move on and like grow up basically. A lot of stuff that is like, about sort of adults who have hurt feelings about things and stuff. A lot of just crazy stuff going on in our culture that we talk about endlessly, and like issues of etiquette and stuff. And then there's just like massive things like this that go on right under our noses, and people just ignore it. It's not seen as important. And I think if you look at like any failed society, the first indication that society has failed, the first and most obvious one, is how they treat children. So in places that have been overrun by violence and gangs and stuff, you see that the children get swept up into this. So you've got like, 10-year-olds going around with guns and stuff, or being killed as part of, like gang revenge or whatever. Same where there's like extremism, like extremist terrorism going on and stuff, like little kids are used as pawns, or they're used, or they're victims of it, or they're, whatever. Like, it's the most telling sign of how a society is doing is whether or not it's protecting children. And there are a bunch of other things you could say about modern society, a bunch of other, things you could talk about, ways in which we aren't doing that anymore, but they would veer into more political than I'd care to get on this channel, really. I try to avoid that, but there are some very obvious examples from recent times of ways in which we've just... The idea of protecting children is like, it's like old hat or something, I don't know, like people don't care. Like, we're supposed to care more about the feelings of grown adults than children. And, we have freedom, we have independence as adults. We can go to other places and do other things and alter our own existence. The point of being a child is you don't have legal rights, so you can't speak for yourself really, and you can't make decisions really, and so other people are supposed to do that for you, and to do that with your best interests in mind. And yeah, I mean, this would be a really easy thing to change. They proposed a while ago making it where if you want to access any of these porn websites, you have to have an account, and you have to put your credit card details in, not to pay, but just to prove that you're old enough to have a credit card and therefore old enough to look at porn. And there was a big backlash against this. I don't really know why. I guess people thought it was like an invasion of their privacy, which is stupid really, because if your ISP or whoever else wants to know what you've been watching, they know anyway. It's not, and the porn site knows as well. It's not, you putting your card details in, even if you had to put your name in, which I don't think you would necessarily anyway, but even if you had to put your name in, that wouldn't do anything, it wouldn't. And there are even other ways you could do it. There could be some form of identity card we develop that doesn't have your identity on it. It merely confirms that you were an adult. I don't know why that system's never been proposed. You could have some kind of number and password, a bit like a social security number or whatever, or a passport number. It doesn't contain any of your personal information. It merely states your age in years, and that could be used for the purchase of all sorts of things. There are so many ways it could very, very, very easily be done. It's not a big business, porn. It's not lucrative. I don't think there's a lot of lobbying going on. So why? And with all the stuff, all the controls on the internet, all of the things you're not allowed to say, all these newfangled concepts of misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, cyberbullying, all of these ways of preventing adults from expressing themselves, and all of these different measures taken to control this and that and the spread of information, and this much more important thing that is objective. It's not, I don't think anybody thinks that 10-year-olds should look at porn apart from pedos, basically. Like, no one thinks that. So, like, it's not a political thing. It's not divisive. It's really easy to resolve. I guess maybe it's divisive to some degree. Some people don't like the idea of having to identify themselves. But regardless, it's not hugely divisive. It's not politically divisive. It's just that some people wouldn't like it. It's a really easy problem to solve, and it hasn't been. And you have to wonder why. And I won't bother speculating about that. And I don't know. I really don't know. You know, there are all sorts of ideas and conclusions you could come to about the effect, the demoralizing effect that has on people, and how that might be beneficial for some people, or some people might like this being the case. I don't know. I don't know if I can go that far with it. Perhaps it's just something that's just been overlooked, because for people who are solely interested in power, there's very little benefit to it. There's very little benefit to a change like this. It doesn't, you know, if you create new rules around what people can say and around the spread of information around, that gives you a lot of power. Whoever's in charge of those rules, it gives you a huge amount of power to control what, you know, the voting public do and say, and that's important. But something that just affects the mental well-being of kids, they're like, man, fuck it, who cares? You know, like, I guess that's probably the most likely explanation. I don't know. But it has to change, and it should change, and it should be seen as a very important thing, because it doesn't even bear thinking about, to be honest, the damage it's doing. It's a form of abuse, really, that it's allowed to go on. It's a form of collective societal abuse, and that's kind of putting it lightly. And there are things individuals can do. I mean, I remember when I was a teenager, I had a friend, and this was when we were like 14 or 15, and his parents had put porn blockers on his computer, and we all thought this was like really sad. Like, we thought it was pathetic, you know. And that was the only person I knew who had that. And I don't know how things are now. Maybe there's a bit more of an awareness, but there's also a lot more availability. And this is not to mention the level of basically pornographic content that is just everywhere anyway, regardless of, you know, even if it's not explicitly porn, it basically is on like TikTok and YouTube and music videos and stuff. I guess that was around to some degree when I was a kid, but it was like 50 cent candy shop and stuff. It somehow seemed a bit more tame than what's around now. And there was less of it. I don't know. There were a lot of like, you know, sort of pornographic music videos back then as well. But yeah, I mean, it's so there are, but it shouldn't be. I don't know. You don't leave it up to adults to stop their kids from drinking and smoking, right? Like, and actually, if you allow your kids to drink and smoke, they can get taken away from you. And I mean, I don't think that's a good solution to many problems. Obviously, I don't think that everybody whose kids have access to porn should have their kids taken away. And probably if they do get put into care, their life's not going to be better, obviously. And it's such a widespread problem that would just be insane. You know, you'd be putting bloody everyone into care. But regardless, we have a kind of there's a strong moral standard as well as regarding that. Like, if you knew a parent who let their kids smoke, you would just be in complete disbelief. And there's a moral standard that prevents people from wanting to allow that to happen. And I don't think we've developed that yet with this. And I think partially it's because we're in completely different times. Whereas when we realised throughout, you know, the 70s and beyond that it's not so good for kids to smoke cigarettes. I guess maybe it was a bit earlier than that, but, you know, I think back then we were a bit more concerned, and if not, maybe not more concerned with their well-being, but at least more accepting of our responsibility to focus on that, and maybe the world was a bit simpler and it was easier to focus on essential issues, essential social issues like family and stuff like that, because there wasn't all this fucking global shit to focus on. And I just feel like we're just lost now with our heads up our asses with like stuff that's not, a lot of it is not important and doesn't affect our own lives, and this is something that is and does. Yeah, I don't know, I really hope to see it talked about a lot more soon. It's crazy that it doesn't get discussed and that nobody really cares about it, and that's sad, and I think it's a sign of where we are as people.